there, wicked listeners, and welcome to episode 10 of Wicked Crimes. As always, I'm your host, Jan Ruud. This week we'll be jumping straight into the case. So, let's get started.
Please be advised that this podcast contains content that could be harmful to some listeners. This includes, but is not limited to, strong language and graphic descriptions of violence, sexual activities, assault, and death. This podcast also engages in discussion regarding various religion, spiritual beliefs, and practices, some of which might be harmful or triggering for some listeners. Please reconsider before consuming this content. The information contained within this podcast is mainly gathered from news articles and official court documents where available. Should you have any more information, or if you know of any incorrect information in this content, please feel free to contact the host through the email found in the show notes.
Our case today reads almost like a mystery novel. In fact, this case has been the inspiration for quite a few books. I do want to warn you though, that the case is still deemed unsolved at this time. I've decided to share this case with you in the same manner that I initially came across it. In researching this case, I mainly relied on an article in The Guardian by Giles Tremlett. Our case begins on the 4th of September 1990 in the small coastal town of Portbou in Spain. At around 7:30 in the morning, a resident of the town made a gruesome discovery. Not far from the local cemetery, hanging in a pine tree, was the body of a young woman. The town of Portbou was in fact so small that before investigators were able to respond to the scene, journalists had already arrived, being alerted through word of mouth. One journalist, who was still 18 himself, was woken up by a phone call from a friend who was a waiter to tell him about it. This journalist was one of the first on scene and was quite surprised to discover that the woman in the tree seemed to be around the same age as him. Since Portbou was a town on the border in 1990, before the Schengen Agreement, there were few people qualified to investigate anything other than immigration and smuggling. This led to Enrique Gomez from the Guardia Police Service to be called in. Gomez found the young woman hanging from the tree, wearing dungarees or denim coveralls, with a green shirt. She had brown hair and blue eyes. Her body was kept floating about half a meter above the ground by a white cord tied around her neck. While the girl's shoes were placed neatly nearby, investigators didn't find any form of identification on her, and nobody in town recognized her. It would take about 3 hours for her body to finally be removed from the tree. Since the scene was visible to the majority of the town from where it was, someone decided to cover the woman's face with a pink veil. Whether to protect her dignity or to protect the town from having to look onto her face, we don't know. Shortly after he arrived on scene, Gomez had found a group of 6 Austrian tourists still asleep only 30 meters away from the woman. He quickly woke them up, demanded their IDs, and then showed them the woman still hanging in the tree. The group all told him that they did not recognize the woman, and that they had arrived at their camping spot at around 3 o'clock in the morning, sat around for an hour and chatted, and by 4 a.m. they were all asleep. They claimed to have not heard or seen anything odd until they were awoken. The campers were sent to the police station where their questioning continued, and they were eventually released. The theory of a suicide quickly became quite popular, even following the woman's body to the morgue in the nearby town. Here, Dr. Rogelio Lasacci received her body, and was told it was a suspected suicide by hanging. Lesacci's initial observation of the body showed him no signs of violence aside from the cord around her neck, supporting the suicide story. When Dr. Lesacci performed his autopsy, he confirmed her death was the result of hanging. The evidence the doctor had seen all supported the suicide theory, and without knowing who the woman was, how she had gotten there, or any other information on her, Dr. Lesacci accepted the case as a suicide and ended his autopsy without doing any tests for drugs or toxins in her body. The autopsy, however, did tell Dr. Lesacci something else. Before her death, the woman had been in good health. She also had a slight tan, but otherwise very pale skin, leading him to believe that she was from Northern Europe. This was all the information that anyone was able to garner about the mysterious young woman who had just appeared over the town that morning. As time went on, the story of the young woman spread like wildfire, intriguing all those that heard about it. Without a name, the young woman was given several monikers, such as the Hanging Woman, or more popularly, the Portbou Girl. 2 months after she had been found, Dr. Lesacci was faced with a milk freezer that malfunctioned regularly due to sudden power cuts. He decided that the time had come for Portbou Girl to be buried. In an attempt to preserve her for when her family comes looking, the doctor embalmed her body, placed her in a white body bag, and then had her lifted into a niche owned by the town, with the letters NN for no name scrawled on the front of the niche. As the years progressed, the story of Portbou Girl was kept alive. Spanish media outlets regularly returned to her story as a mystery to share. Portbou Girl's information was shared on several websites for missing people or unidentified bodies. Then, in 1999, Spain set up the Phoenix program. The Phoenix program aimed to identify cadavers and human remains by hopefully linking them to missing people. It would work by having a maternal relative of missing people provide a DNA sample, which would then be compared to DNA collected from unidentified bodies like that of Portbou Girl. 2 years later, in 2001, Dr. Lesacci returned to the niche he had placed Portbou Girl in to retrieve a DNA sample. However, when he opened the niche, he was shocked to discover the body was missing. You see, the issue was that according to Spanish law, an unidentified body buried in a niche owned by the town should be moved to a communal grave after 10 years. In order to open up the niche for identified bodies of people whose family could not afford a burial spot for them. This is most likely to allow the family of these people to have a decent place to visit their relative. If Portbou Girl had been added to the database within a year of it being set up, her body would have been found. Instead, Portbou Girl's body had been buried in a communal grave, and without proper reason, there was no way to have her exhumed. As the years went on, her story remained with many. It eventually became the inspiration for many novels and stories, some speculating on who she was, some speculating on how she got there, and so on. One way in which she was kept alive was through journalist Tura Solar, who regularly wrote about her on the anniversary of her death. Solar had been so enthralled with the story of Portbou Girl, so much so that when she heard the courthouse was throwing out old documents, she made sure that she saved Portbou Girl's documents from being thrown out as well. It was Solar who eventually, around the 25th anniversary of Portbou Girl being found, came into contact with a true crime filmmaker, hoping that an episode on her could help to identify her. What nobody expected, however, was that before the episode was even aired, it would already be producing results. As part of the episode, the documentary team spoke to Dr. Lakachi, who by now had retired. They shared some of the photographs of the case with the doctor, who to his surprise found photos from the scene that he had never seen before. These photos immediately made him question the suicide theory that he had not even given a second thought all those years ago. You see, the doctor, for the first time, saw how Portbou girl had been hung. He immediately realized that for her to hang herself, she would have had to balance on a branch in the middle of the night with no lights around, then tie the cord around a different branch as well as her own neck. A feat that would be extremely difficult to begin with, but that would have without a doubt left some sort of mark on the girl's body. Scratches from climbing a tree, bruises from slipping, cuts from the cacti and branches on the ground, anything. However, the doctor had not found a single mark on her body, and no dirt or evidence of climbing a tree under her fingernails. In an attempt to determine the possibility of this theory, the doctor tried to reconstruct the scene of her death at home. His findings was that it was impossible for Portbou girl to have hung herself unless she had the ability to levitate. Dr. Lakashi was now convinced that this was not a suicide. But this raised more questions. First of all, how did she get there? In order to get to the tree, a person would have to traverse some very rough and very steep terrain. Then, climb a set of about 20 concrete steps. The only way that Portbou girl would have gotten to the tree without getting a mark on her would have been if she willingly walked there, or if she was carried there while unconscious and unable to fight back. Even if she was carried there unconscious, the doctor believed it would have taken a group of at least 5 people making turns to carry her. Filmmaker Carl Spota was now determined to solve the mystery of Portbou girl. As part of his attempt to solve it, he attempted to find the group of Austrian tourists, hoping that they would know more. His team managed to track down only one of the tourists, a man by the name of Peter, who claimed that he did not remember more than arriving in Portbou quite late, and the traumatic experience after being woken up. Hoping to not only find the other tourists, but also believing that Portbou girl could have been an Austrian herself, Porter reached out to an Austrian broadcaster and asked them to run a segment on Portbou girl. On the 23rd of April 2022, ATV ran an episode on her, and by what could only be described as pure luck, an Italian woman visiting relatives in Austria found herself watching the segment. She was reminded of a young girl from her neighborhood who had gone missing around the same time that Portbou girl had been found. The woman sent an email to ATV with the name of a girl in it, and the show director Benedict Morak followed up. He was able to find out that the missing girl had a surviving sister. Taking a chance, he phoned the sister, a woman by the name of Christina Rauter. He asked her about her sister, but Christina was unfortunately busy with clients and in a poor signal area. Additionally, since her sister had been missing for 32 years by this point, Christina and her family had received many dead-end tips over the years, so she did not want to get her hopes up. Morak asked Christina if he could share some pictures of Portbou girl with her, and Christina agreed. It took Christina 2 days to study the photographs that had been shared with her. When she made up her mind, she showed the pictures to her mother. The women both agreed. They had finally found her. After 32 years, Portbou girl finally got her name back, and the family of Evie Router finally had an answer to what had happened to Evie. Okay, let's jump back to 1990 and find out who Evie Router was. Evie was born on the 2nd of June 1971 to a happy family. Christina, her sister, was 4 years older. Throughout their youth, the two girls were extremely close with each other and always there for each other. When Evie finished school in 1990, she had a difficult time deciding what she wanted to study at university. To help give her time to decide, she made the choice to take a gap year. Evie had managed to get a job in her hometown of Lana. Before starting her new job, however, Evie took a summer vacation and went to visit her older sister, Christina, in Florence. While visiting her sister, the two women had gotten into a debate about hitchhiking. Evie had thought that it was a great way to travel, but Christina had the opinion that this was not something a woman ought to do on her own. Aside from this one debate, the visit went rather well, until the morning of the 3rd of September 1990. Before leaving her apartment that morning, Christina and Evie discussed Evie's plans for the day. Evie told her sister that she might clean the apartment and then make her way to the town of Siena, about 45 miles south of Florence. Christina gave her some money, about 25 euros, and then went on with her day. When Christina returned to her apartment during her lunch that day, she found a note on her table from Evie telling her that she had gone to Siena and would be back later that day. Christina left it at that and went on about her day. When at 8 p.m. her sister had not returned home, she started to grow concerned. Christina knew that Evie was a reserved, cool-headed person, was well organized, and had a lot of respect for others. If she said she would be back, she would be. By 10 p.m., Christina had grown far more than concerned. She spent the rest of her night waiting around the phone, hoping her sister would contact her and tell her that she had missed the last train and had just gone somewhere else to stay for the night. When, by the next morning, she had not seen or heard from her sister, Christina contacted her parents. Their father immediately made his way to the railway, hoping that his daughter would show up, having returned home for whatever reason. Christina started phoning hospitals in both Florence and Siena to see if her sister was admitted for some reason and had been unable to contact them. Christina also took note of Evie's belongings. She noticed that Evie had left her bags and sunglasses behind, which meant that she planned to return. Evie had also taken her keys, her watch, her student rail discount card, and ID, so she had left willingly and as planned. Christina quickly made her way to the police station, where she attempted to report Evie as missing. But here she was told she had to wait 48 hours before she could report Evie as missing. Unable to sit around and wait, Christina jumped on her bicycle and drove around Florence, hoping to spot her sister in the street somewhere. By 9 a.m. the next morning, she was back at the police station to report her sister missing. In her report, Christina described the clothing her sister had worn the morning she had gone missing. Evie Router had worn dungarees and a green shirt. She had brown hair and blue eyes. Evie's family placed missing person posters all over Florence, Siena, and railway stations all over Italy, hoping that someone would recognize her. They were interviewed by newspapers and TV programs, and frequently followed up with police officers. Both the media and police officers speculated that Evie had disappeared out of her own free will, and whether due to this belief or because officers believed that Evie would not have been able to cross the border, her missing persons file was never shared with Interpol. As the years went on, Evie's family went through the horrible trauma that all families of missing people go through, the constant wondering and speculating of where your loved one is, the guilt of thinking that if somehow you had done something different that day, if you had only been more observant, that your loved one might still have been there. The tips and sightings throughout the years would build up their hope, and then knock them down. As Christina was quoted in one of the articles I read, their horror movie had just started. By 2011, 21 years after Evie disappeared, her family petitioned to have her declared deceased, and they were granted their petition. When, in 2022, Evie Router was finally identified, her family was again hounded by the press, and, thanks to the rise of social media, the public as well. It got so bad that Evie's parents had to move from their home, and Christina completely stopped answering her phone. Groups started to pop up all over Facebook, and podcasts and YouTube channels started to speculate on what exactly happened to Evie Router. The question had changed from who is Portbou girl to what actually happened to Evie Router. With one part of the mystery answered, more questions were raised. The first new question was how Evie had gotten to Portbou when she had been traveling to Siena. You see, Siena is to the south of Florence, while to get to Portbou, you would need to travel north from Florence and then west, crossing over the borders of both France and Spain. To top it off, Evie had never set foot on either of those countries. This also made the location of where her body was found extremely odd. How would she be able to choose such a dramatic spot? Made her way to a tree she didn't know was there, perfectly climb it, and then hang herself with no mark or spot of dirt on her body. There was another issue with how Evie would have been able to get there. If Evie had taken the train, the earliest she would have been able to arrive in Portbou was at 5:45 a.m. Her body was discovered at 7:30 a.m. That would barely give her enough time to find everything she needed and to get the task done. On top of all that, it would be difficult to travel that distance with only a couple of euros in her pocket. There is another solution, however. If Evie hitchhiked to Portbou, the trip would only take 10 hours, leaving Evie with plenty of time to do whatever she needed. The issue here is that someone would have needed to notice her if I had given her a lift. But we'll explore an offshoot of this theory in just a moment. The next issue is what had happened to Evie's belongings. Her ID, money, and railway card were all missing. If she had done this to herself, where was her personal belongings, and why did she get rid of it? The next question was, why would Evie have done this? Her family has said that there was no evidence that Evie was depressed. There were no signs that she might have wanted to take her own life. There is, however, a theory that actually fits the story. Let's for a moment imagine that instead of taking the train to Siena, Evie decided to hitchhike, and a group of people picked her up next to the road and offered her not only a lift, but something to drink, which could have been spiked. Evie could be passed out quite quickly and unable to either resist or alert her sister. When the group arrives in Portbou, they could have more than enough time to carry her up to the tree, hang her, and then set up camp nearby. Yeah, I'm referring to the Austrian tourists who were camping near where Evie's body was found. Now, if they had been traveling to Portbou from Austria, their route would have allowed them to cross paths with Evie. This also fits into Lakashi's theory of needing a group of 5 people to carry an unconscious Evie all the way up to the pine tree that she was found in. A woman and her daughter who lived in Portbou at the time also reported hearing loud voices and a woman crying in the streets around 4 a.m. that morning, just in time to fit the timeline. There are issues with this theory, however. The first is that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the group was involved in any way, aside from them happening to be there at the wrong time, and possibly being able to have crossed paths with her 2 countries away. The second is that in crossing those borders, a drugged woman would most likely be noticed quite easily, unless she had gone willingly with them, which does not fit with Evie's personality. The next issue with this theory is that the group not only had no motive, but one would think that they would be smart enough to not camp out a few meters away from where the body had been staged. Christina had made her way to Portbou for the first time 3 weeks after identifying her sister. Here, she met reporters and people like investigator Gomez and Dr. Lesacci, who had directly worked on her sister's case. She was also shown the tree her sister had been found in and given an opportunity to ask questions from those involved. In 2024, she petitioned to dig up the communal grave her sister was buried in an attempt to recover her body. This proved rather difficult since the cemetery had more than one communal grave, and after 2 days of digging up more than 200 bodies, Evie was not found. To this day, her body has never been recovered. Christina has voiced her disappointment in the treatment of her sister's case. Aside from having no form of forensics on the initial case, not showing Lukachi the scene photos, and over the years the few belongings of Evie collected from the scene had also disappeared. This included the cord she was hung with. While Evie's case has officially been categorized as a homicide and not a suicide anymore, Spanish authorities have refused to reopen the case since the statute of limitations on murder in Spain has run out, meaning even if the case is solved, they cannot convict anyone for it. While the Italian authorities did open an investigation, they quickly closed it, citing a lack of new information. There has been so many points during this investigation that could have saved it. If only Italian authorities had alerted Interpol to their missing persons case, she could have been identified nearly immediately. If anyone with a forensic background had stepped foot on scene, it would not have taken 30 years for the case to be reclassified as a homicide. If a blood test had been done as part of the autopsy, there might have been answers about whether or not Evie had been drugged that night. If Evie's body had been added to the Phoenix program earlier, she could have been successfully identified, and her body not only kept safe for the investigation, but also returned to her family. The smallest mercy in this case is that Evie's family had finally gotten an answer on where she is after all these years. While there are still questions out there, they at least know what happened to her and where she ended up. Evie Rauter became famous in death. She had been the subject of many conversations, articles, work of fiction, and somewhere out there, she was even the cause of sleepless nights for someone. Someone out there knows what happened to Evie Rauter, whether she did it to herself or it was done to her. Evie's personal items ended up somewhere. Someone had to see her traveling somewhere. And someone clearly must have been involved in the final moments of her life. We can only hope that Evie's family find more answers soon. That someone, somewhere, develops a conscience. When I looked at Evie's case, I couldn't help but think of all the other families of missing people who have even less answers. Somewhere out there, the answers that all these people so desperately need are hidden, just out of reach. It's not fair, and I can't even begin to imagine the constant pain and anxiety these families are living with. Evie's case makes a good story. It's a mystery that could have been penned by the greatest of authors. But to her family, it's not a story. It's a nightmare. A horror movie that just won't end. Evie Rauter, may you rest gently. And that, dear listener, brings us to the end of episode 10. I thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to tell your friends about it. Until next time, be safe, wicked listeners.